It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode up on the FinSide. Here with Brian Catanzaro and Paul Picken. You can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on iTunes and YouTube. Subscribe to our channel as well, and you can get year-round Miami Dolphins information as we move forward here into the offseason. Really creeping up on us. The free agency, we've already got some news coming out that a couple of notable cuts around the league: Darrelle Revis, Adrian Peterson, Jarius Byrd, Jamal Charles, Nick Mangold. Paul, some names thrown out here. Not a lot of big needs for the Dolphins at those positions. Do you see the Dolphins taking their hacks at any of these guys?
The only way I see them doing any of those really is maybe if they do something I know we talked about a little bit last offseason. Not a super popular opinion out there, but again, I know it's one that picked up a little more steam after this past season with the injury history and the chronic hip issues of Mike Pouncey. I'm not arguing that when he's in shape, when he's healthy, when he's out on the field, he's a great player. But the same conversation we've had about Brandon Albert in the past, Mike Pouncey's not a guy that's going to give you a 16-game season. So I could see a scenario where the Dolphins could flirt with the idea, if the numbers make sense, of possibly trading or cutting Pouncey and pursuing Nick Mangold, provided Mangold's numbers aren't outrageous. And that's no insult to Pouncey, but it's a scenario that it makes business sense. And Miami's already going to have to fill 2 guard spots this offseason, which I know we're going to talk about. So it might make sense to at least flirt with the idea, even if it's nothing that materializes.
Yeah, that'd be the only way I could see them looking at Nick Mangold, is if Mike Pouncey, they've really reached the opinion that this guy's not going to be able to play a full 16-game season. I think that's optimistic as it is. But, yeah, and the other players that I mentioned, I don't see a way that the Dolphins take a hack at them either. Looking at an interesting signing, actually 2 interesting former Dolphins defensive tackles throughout the year, Earl Mitchell and Jared Odrick. Earl Mitchell signs with the San Francisco 49ers, 4 years, $16 million. Really the same contract that he got with the Dolphins a few years ago. I thought he was a tremendous disappointment here in Miami. The interesting thing is, even though Earl Mitchell has a 4.3 body and 4.3 attributes, when he came out of Arizona, he ran a 4.8 40, 6'3", 300 pounds. That looks perfect for a 4.3 defensive tackle. Didn't do the job here. But now he's going to San Francisco, and he's going to play that nose tackle spot in between 2 former first-rounders, DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead. Paul, a little bit rich for the 49ers to give this to Earl Mitchell, or is this what you were expecting?
I'm not exactly shocked. I mean, he is a guy with a fairly unique skill set for a defensive tackle. Even though he's a big body, he's more of an agility tackle in a way. So he didn't really end up being a huge scheme fit. Plus, he battled some nagging injuries down in Miami. Good luck to him. I mean, he seems like he was a good guy. I didn't have a huge issue with him as a defensive tackle in Miami, but this may be a better fit for him. Give him a fresh start. Let him get off to a good run and get him the hell away from our division. So if he does rekindle his career, it's not a huge issue for us.
And one other piece before we move on to the team needs and goals of the offseason, Jared Odrick passes a physical with New England. They have some real interest in him. How much does this break your heart? I know you've got his jersey from when he was a Miami Dolphin.
We were just talking about skill sets with Mitchell. Odrick's skill set is one that I think Bill Belichick would have an absolute field day with. You put a guy with Odrick's skill set with a coach that coaches to strengths and weaknesses and schemes to strengths and weaknesses. God, this would be a heartbreaker if he was up here, because I think he could be absolutely devastating with Belichick as a coach.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think the biggest thing with Odrick is over the last, 5 years with Miami and Jacksonville, he's been put into that role where he's strictly a 4-3 player. He's not playing in a hybrid type of scheme, and that was what was attractive to me when the Dolphins drafted Jared Odrick to begin with. So I would say good luck to Odrick, but if he goes to New England, definitely not good luck. Paul, let's move on to the goals and the needs of the offseason. Taking a look here. So, there really seem to be 4 or 5 positions that stick out for the Dolphins as big needs where we could potentially base that strategy around. If you were to take a look at the Dolphins and what could potentially happen, with re-signing certain players. You've got Kenny Stills out there, you've got Andre Branch out there. What would be your strategy for this offseason?
Biggest need, the linebacker position's a huge need, obviously. Definitely need some defensive help, really up in the front seven more than the back four, even though we may need to look at a safety as the possible eventual Rashad Jones replacement if an agreement can't be reached, or to potentially unseat Issa, even though I like the guy. But linebacker is the biggest thing, and unfortunately free agency for the Dolphins is not a huge boon as far as linebackers go this offseason. Melvin Ingram got franchised by the Chargers. Donta Hightower, while he is a great player, you've got Kiko Alonso not really wanting to kick out of the middle. And really, I think the money for Donta could be used elsewhere. So I think for the linebacker replacements, you're going to have to look at the draft and some of the young players like Neville Hewitt and Mike Hull to fill some of the voids as well. So those are some big spots for me. It is really along that defensive front seven.
Yeah, so sticking with that, we had a question from somebody from Twitter, Frazier Robinson, about Donta Hightower and if this would be the one the Dolphins would pursue. From what I've heard, that he could cost somewhere between $10 and $12 million a year. If that seems to be a pretty rich number, $10 to $12 million a year. Paul, would you pay that for Donta Hightower?
Unfortunately, if he was the team's only need right now, if that was the one piece to get Miami over the hump, get them through everything, yeah, I probably would. But given all the factors out there, given the other needs the team has, while Miami's expected to have that $46 million in cap space with some more that they can clear by cuts to Koamisi, cuts to Deion Jordan, et cetera, I would not use that there. They've got to get some extensions locked up for Rashad Jones. They've got to get extensions locked up for Jarvis Landry. We've got Kenny Stills hanging over our head. And Miami needs more than just one linebacker. They need at least two going into the season. As much as I love Jelani Jenkins, as much as I love Koamisi, I love them when they're healthy. I hate seeing them on the field if they're on the field when they're not, and I hate seeing all the replacement pieces that we get in place, a.k.a. Donald Butler. So for me, as good of a player as Donta Hightower is, unfortunately, this isn't Madden. We can't just go out and sign all the greatest players at every position on the market, and that's Donta Hightower is the premier linebacker this offseason. Miami can make a bigger splash by filling several holes than they can by filling one hole.
I'm with you. Donta Hightower is a fantastic player, but $10 to $12 million a year, I don't see it. And even though it'll allow you to kick Kiko to the outside, I would be excited that we're getting a good player. But like you said, if you can, to me, the biggest word with the Dolphins this offseason is depth. Getting a handful of good players in those different need spots: guard, linebacker, defensive tackle, defensive end. To me, the biggest need is defensive end and defensive tackle for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want Cameron Wake and Jordan Phillips to be playing 30 snaps a game this upcoming season, not to be playing 50 or 45 to 50, because if that's the case, number one, Jordan Phillips won't be as effective. He shows the ability on a few snaps a game or a few drives a game to really take over, especially against the pass. And I'd like to keep him there. Cameron Wake, we're wasting our time and we're wasting him if 35, if he's playing on first down all the time. So which means that the Dolphins really, in my opinion, need three more defensive linemen at least this offseason to make that happen. To give Ndamukong Suh some help. And at the guard spot, you've got two major holes. It'll depend on who's really out there when it's all said and done, because you look at the guard right now, the guard spot in free agency with Kevin Zeitler from the Bengals, Larry Warford from the Lions, Chance Warmack from the Titans, and a few other guys in there. The Dolphins could really have an opportunity to land one of these big-time guards for, $10 million a year or so. And now the offensive line, even with Albert not there, looks like a big coup. So, but Paul, going back to the defensive line for a second.
Yeah, no, actually, one of the things I want to look at over on the defensive side is something I've seen a lot of folks talk about, which is I see a lot of folks saying Miami needs to go after a big-name corner. They need to make a trade for Aqib Talib. They need to make a trade for this guy. They need to chase these guys down. But really, I don't know about you, Kat. For me, when I look at what Miami was able to do in the secondary last season, when I look at Tony Lippett, when I look at Xavier Howard, when I look at the other young guys that they've got, when I look at Bobby McCain, Miami's in really good shape as far as their corners go. Would I like to see them add a young corner or two with promise or potential, or a veteran on a prove-it deal, or something along those lines? Sure. Those are the little small moves throughout the offseason. But really, Miami's focus needs to be on the front seven. And focusing on that front seven, like you were talking about with getting those 3 defensive linemen, like we were talking about before with getting those 2 linebackers. When we look at what that improvement does for the secondary, because that improves the pass rush, which forces the quarterbacks to throw sooner, which forces the corners to not have to be on their guys for 4 or 5 seconds at a time, where that keeps Cameron Wake fresh, so he can be even more effective rushing the passer. That improves the secondary as well, because they're not being asked to do as much, so they're able to do more with what they're asked of. So, I mean, there's a lot of improvement that could be had with that front seven that helps the entire defense, and as does getting back a healthy Rashad Jones.
Right, yeah. Looking at the defensive backs, one advantage that they do have is they have 8 players in their secondary who are 29 years old or younger. And you look at the cornerbacks and the safeties. I mean, you've Maxwell, Lippett, Howard, Bobby McCain, Rashad Jones, Issa, Michael Thomas, and Walt Aikens. You've got 8 players there who are 29 years old or younger. Most of them are on the younger side of those 20. So, yeah, I think if it's one spot that you're going to take a look at and say, hey, we're going to trust what we have here and hope that we continue to develop it, is defensive back. One thing I would be a little bit more open to is if they really like A.J. Bowie, the cornerback from the Texans, who had an amazing year last year, looked like an elite cornerback. If they say, hey, look, we've got a lot of money, we're building more for the future, or we're building more for long term instead of short term, we're going to sub out A.J. Bowie with Byron Maxwell because we're not sure if Maxwell can play a whole season, would be a little bit open to that. But I would probably rather even keep the secondary the way it is. Maybe add a player like Trevin Wade from the Giants, Cody Sensabaugh from the Rams, one of those role players to give us a little bit more depth. But for me, overall, the Dolphins have to, this offseason, for me, nail the guard spot, at least one guard spot and defensive end, because otherwise you're cutting games off of Cameron Wake's career, and that doesn't do well for anybody. Paul, anything else that you want to add before we wrap up the segment?
I just want to talk a little bit about that guard spot and kind of go back to that question that we had gotten about Donta Hightower. I would much rather see Miami go out, spend the money on Zeitler, who you mentioned, spend the money maybe on Warmack, and suddenly look at that offensive line from left to right. As it stands right now, you'd have Juwan James at right tackle. You might have Warmack at right guard, Pouncey at the center position, Zeitler at left guard, and Laramie Tunsil at left tackle. Suddenly you've got an elite offensive line, and you could probably mix and match Zeitler and Warmack for roughly about $16 million combined, maybe $17 million, hopefully, given the talent that's in the guard market out there. So there are some possibilities there of what you can do. And suddenly that enables Ryan Tannehill to stay upright and healthy. That enables Jay Ajayi to not only stay upright and healthy, but to rush for possibly even more yards. So there is a lot that you can do, but that offensive line is going to be key. So if I was going to focus on anything, that front seven and the guard position are huge, as well as we do need another receiver, whether it's Kenny Stills or somebody else out there on the market, which I know we covered a lot of Kenny Stills talk last week, and it looks like he's right in the neighborhood we talked about in terms of it being $12 million a year. So could be interesting this offseason.
You bring up the guard spot. I have a hard time seeing the Dolphins being able to land both of those guards, and I'm not quite sure if we'd even want to, because for a couple of reasons. You know, if you look at, like you said, Chance Warmack and Zeitler and Warmack and Warford have all been right guards in their entire careers. And I think if you can get one of them, it's probably going to cost for Zeitler, I think it'll be $10 million easily. As a comparison to that, Laurent Duvernay Tardif the right guard for the Chiefs. And some people might be thinking, who's that? He just signed a contract extension, 5 years, $41 million. And I think Zeitler is a step above him. So if the Dolphins were to sign Zeitler, I'd have a hard time seeing them being able to land another guard out there. And if they do, they're really using probably over half of the money that they have for it too. And now defensively, you're really going to have to be scraping the bottom of the barrel at these positions. But at guard, if they can land Zeitler from left to right, you've got say heading into the draft, you've got Tunzel, Craig Urbick, Pouncey, Zeitler, and Juwan James. I think that's a very solid offensive line. Not to mention the Dolphins with those three compensatory selections, a 3, 5, and a 5, might be able to draft 2 interior linemen there and develop those appropriately. So but overall for me, guard and defensive end are the spots I really want the Dolphins to nail. You've got to pressure the quarterback, and you've got to make sure Ryan Tannehill is protected. So, Paul, having said that, we're going to wrap up the segment. And please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on iTunes, as well as subscribe to us on YouTube. We're going to be having all your off-season coverage. We're really going to get into the draft here over the next couple of weeks. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it's on the FinSide.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide.
Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what Brian, Cat, and Paul about to do again. We rep our team, you can't change, stop, or rule